Yes, I started the break-even program on the Gold Coast in 1993 and worked with problem gamblers as an addictions counsellor and financial counsellor, and then transitioned to work for the industry. So I've been working for the casinos for 12 years, rolling out our exclusions program and our responsible gambling programs. So this is a special piece of work that I did together with my colleagues. So you'll see Relationships Australia on here, and then you'll see all the casinos on the top. So this is something that we did together, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues from Relationships Australia. I used to work for Relationships Australia, and then they're in our area. Just so I can explain to you, most of you probably know Australia well, but I thought a little map might help. So we're here on the Gold Coast in southeast Queensland around Brisbane, and that's where we're running this pilot program. We have 4 casinos. We have one in Sydney, and we have one in Townsville, one in Brisbane and one on the Gold Coast. So this project is really around the southeast Queensland area around Brisbane, just to put it in context. Relationships Australia has a range of services throughout Queensland, and they have one in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, Ipswich, Logan. They're all in the southeast Queensland region around Brisbane. They also run services out of Longreach, Mackay, Whitsunday, Rockhampton and Central Queensland. So they're quite entrenched, and they've been involved in gambling help services for over 20 years, because I started that service for them as I said, in 1993. So, the Productivity Commission said in 2010 that there are 15,000 exclusion agreements in place in Australia, and they represent 9 to 17% of problem gambling population. In Queensland, we had some new legislation that came into place in 2005, and so that made quite a change. Prior to that, the casinos had always had self-exclusion. The clubs and pubs didn't do quite the same thing as what the casinos did. So we had mirror legislation that went across all sectors in the gambling industry in 2005, and it requires the gambling operator to exclude someone who requests that they be self-excluded. And it allows gambling operators to exclude people if the gambling operator believes that person has a gambling problem. And that's called an exclusion direction for problem gambling. It facilitates the referral of patrons to seeking self-exclusion to gambling counselling, so it's a pathway to treatment. And the exclusions are imposed for a period of 5 years. They have a sunset clause and they expire after 5 years. So the statistics in Queensland around exclusions have not been actually made publicly available. So I've just given you a little bit of the statistics around casinos. Now in Queensland there's actually 4 casinos. One of them isn't run by us. So these are the government statistics from July 2012 to June 2013. So there were 306 self-exclusion orders across the 4 casinos and 2 venue exclusion directions in that period. The clubs and hotels would have a much higher number of exclusions than what the casinos have, but the casinos are the largest venues. So the principal regulatory framework comes under those 4 pieces of legislation: casinos, Casino Control Act, Gaming Machine Act for clubs and pubs. Keno has their own act, and the Wagering Act also allows for self-exclusion. Lotteries do not have a self-exclusion program. And our regulator is the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation in Queensland. So this was a little picture of our pathways to self-exclusion. So just to talk a little bit about the self-exclusion in Queensland, it has a 24-hour cooling off period. This is the key points of it. And after that 24 hours, you cannot apply to revoke that exclusion for 1 year. After 1 year, you can apply, but with the application, you have to complete a form and send it to the operator, and there's 28 days for the operator to decide whether or not you actually have a gambling problem and whether they want to issue an exclusion direction for problem gambling. And so if there's some evidence, we would issue one of those if we believe that someone shouldn't just revoke their exclusion. And that does happen from time to time. As I said, there's a 5-year sunset clause. The industry can apply exclusion directions for problem gambling if there's sufficient evidence. So whilst we don't have third-party exclusion programs, if a family member came to us, we would actually consider that as part of evidence in relation to whether or not we would be considering issuing an exclusion direction for problem gambling. Details of counselling services are provided, and that's in the legislation, so we must provide it. And there are consequences for breaching exclusions in Queensland, and they can actually end up with a penalty infringement from the government, or the maximum, go to court in front of a magistrate, maximum fine is $4,400. So it's a little different from when we are working in New South Wales, and our casino down there, it doesn't have that form of consequence. When you breach your self-exclusion, you just get asked to leave. So I think it's really good that there's some teeth. So talking about the history of the pilot that we decided to do with our friends in Relationships Australia, the Relationships Australia counsellors had on the Sunshine Coast really tried to help their clients to find pathways to exclude without actually going to a venue. And the very well-meaning councils up there had decided that they would do area-wide exclusions, and bear in mind that exclusions in Queensland are the responsibility of the gaming industry. They're not the responsibility of the counselling services. So the counselling services decided that this was a really good idea for them. They filled out the forms and they sent them to all the venues in the area and said, exclude this person, they've got a gambling problem. Well, you can imagine what sort of response they got from the industry. When that happened, it wasn't very much response at all, because the industry said, well, there's a lot of problems with this. We don't know who the person is. We don't have the correct identity of them. If they are excluded from too many venues, we'll have a huge exclusion list and we won't know how to manage it properly. And so I was asked to talk at a Responsible Gambling Network up in the Sunshine Coast around that time, and they asked me what I thought about what they'd done, and I said, look, let's find a pathway and see if we can work together on a way to help people to exclude without actually having to come to the casino, and let us be the pilot, and let's hope that that can translate to other venues like the clubs and hotels. So we put together this pilot program based on the Sunshine Coast, and that's how it all started. I'm just not sure this presentation, because there was two of us doing it. So there are some barriers and limitations to self-exclusion, and these are some of the barriers and limitations which I'm sure that you're all quite aware of. So the remotely assisted self-exclusion program that we put together is that the client will go to Relationships Australia's office, and they give Relationships Australia the authority to provide information to the casino. So they fill out the forms. We join a meeting by phone with the counsellor and the client is in Relationships Australia's office. they fill out the forms. Relationships Australia do a really good job for us because they identify the person, they take a photocopy of their photo ID, they verify the authenticity of the identification, and they acknowledge the service of the documents. So they send information through to us, and there is a list of verification identity on the next slide that I will show you. And we issue the documents and we return them by email. If some of, in future we can also do them by fax if needed, but mostly we do them just by email. And they send us a photo of the person, and that's how it gets facilitated. We have a statewide exclusion database, so when someone is excluded from our casino on the Gold Coast, for example, they'll also be excluded in Brisbane and in Townsville. Now, it's really helpful for someone who lives on the Sunshine Coast who wants to be excluded from the Brisbane casino. They don't have to drive to Brisbane and exclude. They can do it now by just going to their local counselling service. The verification of an identity was really important for the industry because if we get it wrong, we can actually end up excluding somebody in an incorrect name, and they might turn up the next week and open a rewards card in their right name, and we would get into serious trouble with the government because we're really highly regulated industry. So it's very, very important for us to make sure we have proper verification of the person. And one of the things that happens quite often, particularly with our Asian customers, and as you can imagine in casinos we have a lot of Asian customers, transposing names is quite common. And when you ask an Asian person their name, they start with their surname, what we consider in Western culture the surname. And so our staff write down the surname as the Christian name and the Christian name as the surname. So of course then we find ourselves down the track with the person with their presenting with their name the other way around, and of course we end up getting ourselves into a pile of bother. So that has happened in the past, many years ago. It doesn't happen today because we're very careful about the way we verify the identity of people. And the system is working very well in pilot form, and we're quite pleased with the way it's working. It does take us about twice as long to do an exclusion as it would if we weren't doing it by phone. But for us, that's a resource that we're quite happy to put in place because we think it's beneficial for the client and customer. So, of course, the benefits we're hoping will increase the uptake of self-exclusion, reduce embarrassments for clients about coming to counselling, very supportive process for clients. There's a link between self-exclusion and treatment, which is really important. And it's a secure process for the venues as well because we can be actually guaranteed that the identity of the person has been verified. And of course it's a really good catalyst for building better relationships between the industry and the community. So looking at the outcomes, so far we haven't done very many of them, but we've had some positive feedback. We had a client customer on the Gold Coast, and they were ordered by the court to self-exclude from the casino. The same judge in their wisdom ordered them not to go to the casino. So they were prevented from going to the casino. So how were they going to exclude? Because at that beginning of that stage was that they couldn't exclude unless they came to the casino and identified themselves. So the poor person was sort of in a bit of a dither. So they were very happy that we were able to send them to Relationships Australia and do this exclusion process because it was part of their parole requirements by the courts for them to exclude. We've had some people on the Sunshine Coast wanting to exclude from the casino, and for them to do that, they would have had to drive for an hour and a half down to Brisbane to do the exclusion. So that was also really helpful. So they did their first one at the casino as a pilot. They also wanted to exclude from venues in the 15-kilometre radius of where they lived. So there were a lot of clubs and hotels around that area. So Relationships Australia has the councillor up there has done a really good job. He's now been working with all the other venues in the area, signing memorandums of understanding with them. They have a memorandum of understanding with us, and duplicating all the paperwork and documents that we put together for our program with the casino, and they're duplicating it with the clubs and the hotels. So the clubs and hotels are starting to pick up this process as well, which is really nice, and that was the intent of us actually being the industry leader by putting our hand up and saying, we're happy to do the pilot. We probably won't have a lot of people taking it up, but let's hope that it's like the pebble in the pond, it goes out in a ripple, and people in the clubs and hotels will take this on board and work with Relationships Australia as well. So that's what's happened. I guess there's limited knowledge about the program, so there's not that great a take-up at the moment. Gambling Help staff are not convinced about the effectiveness of self-exclusion, so they don't always recommend it. And some venues really prefer face-to-face exclusion, so they can deal directly with the customer. And the remotely assisted self-exclusion adds administrative tasks to both the venues and to Gambling Help services. So those are some of the limitations of it. Moving forward, we're looking at doing some counsellor education to some of the other counselling services to talk to them about signing memorandum of understanding with the casino. We've just started working on a marketing or advertising campaign. Now, you can imagine as a casino, we can't advertise Gambling Help services, so we're supporting Relationships Australia. They're going to do some advertising, particularly to some of the called communities. We have already got an advertisement done in Mandarin, and we're going to put it in the Chinese newspaper. And we will be supporting it, but it'll be a Relationships Australia advertisement, not a casino advertisement. So it's I guess, the way that I can get permission to move forward with this. And more clubs and hotels are really said they're keen to join the pilot. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with Centre Care up in our Townsville region, and so they're going to come online with that as well. And that's a regional area outside of the city area. So implications, really, it explores the opportunities for multi-site exclusion. So our exclusions are multi-site exclusions, so when you exclude from one, you exclude from all our casinos in Queensland. We offer exclusion from Star in Sydney as well, but that can't be all in one agreement because of the legislation in New South Wales is quite different from the legislation in Queensland. So our pilot has given the opportunity to self-exclude from all the Echo casinos, and this program is a template for other industry and operators and community services who may choose to mirror it. We have signed a couple of MOUs in New South Wales and Sydney for a similar thing to happen at the Star, and it's just the system is a little different to what it is in Queensland. So if anybody would like to contact us, that's where you find us. So there's myself at the casino, Emma Malone, she's the Practice Improvement Coordinator at Relationships Australia, or Steve Novak, who's the counsellor up on the Sunshine Coast, and he is the catalyst that started this whole affair in the beginning. And if you have any questions, happy to take those.
Mike?
Hi, thanks very much for your presentation. Just one question. I noticed there was a 24-hour cooling off period.
Yeah.
And I know that the regulations here in New Zealand will say that once you've declared yourself to be a problem gambler, that exclusion couldn't be revoked or destroyed. I just wondered if having that 24-hour period, if someone kind of panicked and changed their mind,
Yep.
but then subsequently went on to bankrupt themselves, could that leave them open to harm, and could it also pave the way for litigation against somebody for that?
I don't believe so, and I think the 24-hour cooling off period is actually a good tool. Quite often, our casino staff are very intuitive. They really want to help people, and they become quite distressed and concerned if they think that someone is being coerced into doing an exclusion against their will. Sometimes when I'm doing them, because of my counselling background, I might be worried that I'm sitting in front of someone who is a perpetrator of domestic violence. And so in those cases, we are very happy to be able to very clearly identify that there is the 24-hour cooling off period. And look, I had a gentleman the other day who came with his wife, and he wanted to exclude, and then we talked about he was going to lose his rewards card. So then he said he wasn't going to do it. He would do it the next day, and he was going to collect all his points. The wife was very agitated about the 24-hour cooling off period. Happy to say, we had a little conversation. They did come back the next day, and he did exclude. And I thought, oh, this is a candidate for 24-hour revocation if I've ever seen one. Well, he didn't. And after 24 hours is gone, it's gone.
Is it used very much, Mary?
It is used quite often, not as much as you might think. We do maybe around 30 self-exclusions a month, and we might get one 24-hour revocation every 2 months. It's also a good tool for us, because when that happens, we've actually had a circumstance when there was a young girl who came with her parents to self-exclude, and she said to us at the time that she was only doing it because her parents said that if she didn't do it, she was going to be thrown out of home. And she came back the next day, and she wanted a 24-hour cooling off. I want to revoke my exclusion. She filled out the forms, and once she's filled out the form and signed it, the legislation is, I give you permission to exclude me. Now, here's another form. I take away your permission to exclude me. And so it's in the hands of the customer, client, whatever you like to call them, not in the hands of the casino. We can't say no. So immediately their exclusion's revoked. But, we went, well, you know what about this girl? We think she's got a gambling problem. And in fact, we had some files on her, and we go back to our responsible gambling incident register, and we found that she'd been asked to leave many times for staying too long, and there were a whole series of things. So she came back the next day, started gambling, and she started gambling out of control, and we were watching her. Within a week, we issued her an exclusion direction for problem gambling, and boy, was she mad. But once you've got an exclusion direction for problem gambling, pretty much that's it, because you can't revoke that one in 24 hours. There's no cooling off. You go to the tribunal and ask them if they will lift it. Well, no one's tested the tribunal yet, so that's what happens. So we do really have goodwill about it. So I think it's important to be there, because I have also seen people been excluded against their will. There was one lady who actually was brought to exclude by her church, and the people from her church stood in the hallway outside and prayed while she got excluded. Then they took her home, and then they locked her up for 24 hours to make sure that she couldn't leave the house to come back to revoke her exclusion. And she was really distressed. She came to see me, or she called me a few days later and told me the story. And I was actually prepared to advocate for her on her behalf with the regulator, that she had actually been forced to exclude under duress. But we had a talk about it, and she really did have a gambling problem. And once I agreed to help her get some legal help to fight the exclusion under duress, and we talked about her gambling problem, she actually decided to leave it in place, because it wasn't about, for her, that she didn't have a gambling problem, she didn't want to do it. It was about being forced to do something against her will.
Did the church get done for kidnapping?
No, but they should have been, because it was deprivation of liberty. It's illegal. Mm.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah.
My question is based on the venue operators and the staff. Who's giving the training for those who are working in clubs and pubs, or even the casino, because maybe some of them are quite fairly new?
Yep.
And who provides in order to be compliant with the self-exclusion when it's processed within the venue? Okay.
In Queensland and in New South Wales, there are regulations that people who work in the gaming industry must have a certificate of a responsible service of gambling certificate. So you can't work in the gaming area without one of those, which means you have to have participated in a range of training. So in the casino, what we do in Queensland and in New South Wales, we provide, on top of that, we have Welcome Day, and we do a 30-minute briefing about responsible gambling and what we do in our responsible gambling program for all staff. So those people that work back of house washing dishes get that training as same as someone who's going to deal on the floor. But someone dealing on the floor must have a certificate. Someone washing dishes doesn't have to have the certificate. Then we do, every 12 months, we do every 2 years we do refresher training. 3 times a year we do responsible gambling team awareness and responsible gambling awareness weeks. So that's how we make sure our staff are trained and know about what it is we do. And we train our staff not to intervene with people that they think might have a problem. We have a motto, respond with respect and refer. So they must respond respectfully to somebody they think that's got a problem. They refer that to either their supervisor, manager, one of our responsible gambling liaison officers, or to myself or my colleagues that work in the casino. And through that tier level, someone will either be approached and spoken to, or if there isn't a reason to approach someone, we would document it, and that would go into our responsible gambling incident register. If we have multiple incidents about a person, we would then be approaching that person and talking to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary.
Okay.